was the man we've come to pay respects to like Tony Benn. I'm going to speak later about my personal relationships with Tony, as are some of my colleagues from inside and outside this house. But I'm going to first ask a very good friend of mine, a very good friend of Tony's, Lord Alf Dubs, who has to go and do his democratic bid soon and vote to support the standardised patterns of battle regulations.
That's it, you got it.
So Alf, the floor is yours.
So, thanks very much indeed for arranging this. You caught me at the Battersea Labour Party fundraising event and said you had this meeting, would I come along? And that's great, and thank you for asking me. I'm just going to speak very briefly because any minute I've got to rush away and vote. I knew Tony on and off for quite a number of years. I remember before I was in the Commons, I was just a party member, and I had an argument with him the first time about something very small. I'd asked to give him a lift back. I was one of the few people in the Paddington Labour Party who had a car. So will I give him a lift after a party meeting? So I said fine. So I gave him a lift, and I said, hey, seatbelt. And he looked at me, and I said, nobody in my car goes without a seatbelt. And I made him put a seatbelt on, and he did it dutifully. And he was very interesting. He told me some interesting things about, this was at the time in Barber Castle and in Places Life, and he told me some very interesting things about what was going on there, and he was very frank and open. But then I got to know him better when I was fortunate enough to be elected for Battersea South and then Battersea to House of Commons. And because Tony was a very key figure in the party all the years that I've known him. He was a controversial figure. He was controversial and people had arguments. But there was something about him which was very compelling. And very compelling when he spoke, his analysis. He was a brilliant speaker, and he had a sense of what the Labour Party and the Labour movement was about. And that was pretty terrific and inspiring, even if all of us at times had our disagreements with him. Because he was a key figure, and he was a very important figure. And he was utterly committed and dedicated. I went to Tolpuddle about 2 years ago. You know, the big trade union demo. I hadn't been to Tolpuddle before, and they're moving. But what was most moving of all was, it was the day after the Durham Miners' Gala, and Tony had been to Durham, and then he came straight down to take part in Tolpuddle. And he was getting on, and he was frail, and he was sat there, and I sat next to him and chatted to him. But what a person to show that level of commitment. You know, he wasn't physically well, he died not long afterwards. He wasn't physically well, but he went up to Durham to that very important event in the socialist calendar, and very important for the miners, on whose behalf he fought very hard for many years, as had a lot of us. But he went there, and they came to Tolpuddle for this big day when the trade unions were there in force. And I thought to myself, this man is pretty terrific. What a level of commitment. And so I knew he wasn't well, I knew he wasn't going to last long, and I was at his funeral, and his funeral was quite those of you who were there, it was quite an event, because outside the funeral, it was like a Labour Party event. The miners were there, and people were there for the fringe event, and it just showed what respect people had. They came all the way to London from the northeast in order to demonstrate their support for the work he'd done in his political life. And that was pretty terrific, and I thought pretty humbling. And normally, you know, funerals are sort of, well, funerals okay, I suppose, but there were happy occasions. But there was something pretty special about his funeral. I was lucky enough to be in St Margaret's, and there was a knowledge of people outside as well. And there was something special about the way in which people talked about him, the way in which people remembered him, and the enormous respect and commitment that he'd earned from so many people, such a variety of individuals and organisations. So I was pretty impressed by him. I have just one or two quick memories. I remember when we had the Falklands War was on. Now, look, some of us thought the Falklands War was a nonsense, and indeed a small group of us voted against the Thatcher government on the Falklands War, and he was one of them. And I remember we used to sit and chat about these things and talk about what it meant and what we could do. So I have many memories of Tony, but he was a very inspiring figure. And without him, the Labour movement is a poor place. Without him, the Labour movement hasn't got the base that it used to have. Of Of course, it's easy to say at my age, you know, people aren't like Tony anymore. They don't make him like that anymore. Well, of course they do, but nevertheless, he was an inspiration, and at his best, he was one of the persons who inspired me the most. And at one time, I thought he was destined to be leader of the party, or we could analyse why that didn't happen. But I was very privileged to know him. I was very privileged to, I was a friend of his, and I was very privileged to be able to be in Parliament with him and to be able to support him on many of his campaigns and ventures. So as I said, the world, the Labour Party is a poor place without him.
Thank you very much, Alf, and appreciate you being here tonight, particularly when you wanted to. Can I want to start talking about Tony, but I want to say some bad things about him. Because as a 13-year-old boy, I hated Tony Benn. Tony Blair. I hated Tony Benn because he was the man who sunk pirate radio in this country. And anybody, I'll go around this room try and find anybody old enough to remember pirate radio. And Tony was very, very clear at the time. It was because commercial organisations were broadcasting from offshore and basically they were undermining the BBC. And Tony being the man he was, and he was at the time, he was Secretary of State, if that was the proper title. I think it was Postmaster General, that actually brought in the Marine Offences Bill on the 15th of August 1967. It gets burned inside my mind as a music fan. But what made it even worse, on the 30th of September 1967, we had the birth of Radio 1, and that brought Tony Blackburn to the world. So, you know, one TB to the TB. If Tony Benn has anything to do in his life, is to give the world Tony Blackburn a platform. But apart from that, I've got nothing but good to say about the man. As a former Durham miner, I reiterate the words that Alf said. From 1962 onwards, he was a regular guest at the Durham Miners Gala, a huge gathering of, at times, 250,000 people gathered together to stand up for what they believe in, to stand up for the right to work, the right to have a decent standard of living, the right to be able to bring your people and family up in peace and security, things that Tony was dedicated to. And every time he came to that gala, everybody went away feeling better about themselves because he made people believe that we can create a better world. And it isn't just about what family we're born into, as he proved very, very clearly, how much money you had, what your status was in life. He believed we were all equal and we're all as good as each other and nobody was better than anybody else. He did tremendous things on behalf of the miners. In 1975, the last time this country actually had an energy plan, Tony Blair wrote it. It's called a plan for coal. It envisions a country burning 200 million tonnes of coal, but classically, even that long ago, burning coal cleanly. It developed with the National Coal Board processes which built laboratories, built places in Yorkshire and in North Wales that actually developed clean coal technology long before the rest of the world. And sadly, as people will know, with the demise of the coal industry following the 1979 election, not only did we destroy the coal industry as it was, we also destroyed any semblance of developing clean coal technology in this country, which has been the detriment not just of this country, but of the world. And it's sad that we face that. I first met Tony personally in 1984, when as a coal miner on strike, I came down to London in the November of that year to try and raise money. We'd been on strike since the March, and the truth was that nearly every doorstep, every place in London was already covered by miners from the rest of the country. So we weren't doing very well in collecting money, but what we did do, we got invited to go and speak on a platform. And we were in the friend's house, which I'm sure is on Euston Road. Yeah, a long time ago. And I'm there as a relatively young man, just giving my experience, asking for support. And Tony got next. And some people from the Revolutionary Communist Party started assailing them and saying, how dare you be on that platform with a miner when you close certain number of mines, etc., etc. Typical of some people on the left in this country. If we're not attacking each other, we're not happy. And I got up and said, hang on a minute, you know, if we're going to start attacking Tony Benn, we might as well do it and go home, because to me, Tony Benn epitomised somebody who you can always rely to stand up with you and be a comrade. Al spoke about Tony going from Durham to Tolpuddle. I'd actually been with him the day before, and sadly Tony took ill He was at the dinner the night before, he took her to the dinner, and actually during the day in Durham, he was in his bedroom. The first time he hadn't been on a platform for almost 50 years, because even when he wasn't speaking, he still came as a guest to Durham. That's how committee was, and it was sad to see such a fantastic human being at the end of his life, like the rest of us, brought down by the frailties of humanity, but he was still there, and his spirit was there then, and it'll be there as long as the Durham miners come together, and as long as working people stay together. And the thing that I always will remember about Tony Benn, unlike politicians of today who are managerial and technocratic, whenever they face a problem, it's like, oh, how will we get around this? His belief was, remember why we're doing this. We're doing this because it's the right thing. We're doing it because it's morally right. We're doing it because we're doing it for people who can't stand up for themselves. We're doing it for people of the world. We're doing it for the human race. He had a vision that sadly is lacking in politicians of today. And unless we get back to a scenario where people give, particularly those people who are at the bottom of society, unless we give those people a vision, people will continue being disengaged for politicians. If we just keep telling people how hard it's going to be and how badly we're going to treat you, then people will turn off from us. And one thing I always remember, and stick with me to the end time, is hearing Tony Benn talk about education. And he saw education as the key to people on a better life. And he said, education will be free for everybody at any level, whether you're 6 or 96. And he included university education. And he said, what's wrong with going to education? Just to enjoy it, to learn things, to sit down, whether it's history, geography, media, anything in the world. If you're getting enjoyment out of it and enlightening your life, isn't that something worthwhile doing? And for me, that spoke volumes about man. Because you know the truth, in the world we live in now, everything has to have a price. It's how much it will cost to send a kid to university, how much the free school costs to settle, how much the academies cost. Everything is pounds and pence. And for Tony, what was more important than the price of things was the value of things. And for me, Alfie is right. We are pulling from not being here, Alfie, we are sad. He was our conscience. He was certainly the other party's conscience. I think that's one of the reasons why some people actually acted against him to stop him getting a leadership position, because his conscience was to prick people, and some people didn't like that. But there's a truth, politicians need for conscience pricking once in a while, and Tony Benn was the one par excellence for doing that. So I'm delighted to stand here tonight. It was a sad time last March. We lost Tony, we lost Bob Crow, another great trade union leader, sadly 30 years younger than Tony. And for my part of the world, we lost a great comrade called Stan Pierce, who most people won't have heard of. He was a man about the same age as Tony. He was the youngest man at his colliery in 1947, when the day that the mines were nationalised. And he got the job of putting the flag on top of the gold mine and saying, this now belongs to the people. And it's people like that that Tony Benn devoted his life to, when he could have lived the life of a landed gentry and not cared about anybody. He could have wandered off and come in here and put his ermine on every once in a while and claim his money and done nothing. He turned his back on that, and he did it for people who haven't got power to stand up for themselves. A hero in every sense of the word, our comrade Tony Benn. Thank you. And now I'm delighted to introduce my colleague from the House of Commons, Katie Clark, who we worked together in the trade union unison for a number of years. Katie is the Member of Parliament for Drogheda and Arran, is that right? Well, North Ayrshire, it's but much more important, just recently elected as Secretary of the Trade Union Group of MPs in this building. Great comrade, great friend. Katie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dave. And I knew Tony Benn from afar for many, many years. I'm someone really that's been involved in the labour movement since I was at school. I came from an area that was affected by the mine closures of 1984, 1985. I attended trade union and labour events where Tony Benn was always one of the main speakers. And of course he used to come to Scotland regularly. So at events there also I would see him speak. And of course he was a man of great style. He was a man of great charisma. but he was also a man that spoke a language that really almost everybody could relate to, and I think that was his power. He put very complex and difficult ideas into simple language, and he inspired. He made people believe that it was possible to change the world. He made people believe that they were important and what they believed in was something that was worth struggling for. And I think that's why he's held in such affection by so many people in this country. I knew Tony Benn from afar. I probably met him very, very briefly, maybe on one or two occasions. I got to know him a little bit better when I arrived here in 2005. He was no longer an MP at that time, as he said, he'd retired to get more involved in politics. But he still attended the campaign group of Labour MPs almost every week at that time. The Socialist campaign group of Labour MPs used to meet every Wednesday in room W1 at 5:30. And Tony, like the rest of us, would be going to vote on this issue, which is an issue that I'm standing on here involved in, and John McDonald's trying to talk out, so I'm obliged to go and vote. Tony was very, very involved in the discussions at that time about what the Labour government was doing, what the Labour government should do, and what Labour MPs should do in this place. And it was a massive pleasure to sit there with him for that hour every week to hear what he had to say. And Alan Simpson was also one of the people who was always in the room. So he's somebody that I remember with a massive amount of affection. I'm going to have to sort of draw my remarks to a close to go to vote. I don't think Tony would mind at all, but it's a pleasure that I've had this opportunity just to say a few words of thank to him today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I hope Tariq and they will join us later on.
There's chance of our vote.
Oh, that's wonderful. So you are here for some time. Yes. Can I say a few words before I invite my next speaker, Ellen Simpson? I think to remember, I'm not here to mourn. I'm here to celebrate the life of Tony Benn, because the great things he did in his life are very few people in this world who have done that. So I think let's celebrate his life, not mourn about his life, and continue with work he was doing. I think the best way to celebrate these people, and on my right, somebody sitting who was very close friend of Tariq, and we know that Bhutto was hanged 40 years almost ago in 1979, but his legacy continued. And today in Pakistan is the second largest party, or the first largest party, he will speak later on to tell us about it, is the Pakistan People's Party, which was left by Bhutto. So the best thing to remember the great people, the visionary people, the people who want to change this world, is to continue with their philosophy, their commitment, and their things they have started to do. I met Tony Benn in 1981 when I came to this country as a political refugee fighting against a manic Ziaul Haq. I think we are facing his fruits even today in the world we live in. The things he started. And I know Sandra Setley has visited me in Pakistan many times to see personally how things have changed from a liberal, progressive Pakistan to an extremist Pakistan, but now things are changing, and I hope they will change soon, that we live in a peaceful world. But I came here as a refugee, as a trade unionist from Pakistan. I went to Tony Benn to support him in presenting the case of Pakistan International Airline trade union, which was banned by Ziaul Haq in 1981. And I went to him to support me, and he said, Mushtaq, I will support you in ILO, International Labour Organization. I will support you in ITF, International Transport Federation, and he introduced me to that. And then he brought me into the parliament, and look at me. I'm here after 33 or 34 years in this parliament, and I'm working on the same level. So I think the Tony Benn, to remember him, the best way is to do the things which he did. He raised the voice for the voiceless people. And there are people sitting in this audience from Hazara community, from Ethiopian community, from Palestinian community, from Pakistani community, and many other communities who are voiceless. Because in third world today, we know that in unipolar world, all rights have been suppressed by the leaders of the world today, and they don't care about you, the people. They only care about what their economic and other interests are. So let's carry on that work which Tony Benn left last year on 14th of March and carry on with it as long as we live and transfer it to other young people who are sitting here in the audience and on the table, that they can carry on it. I think we live in a very poor world and we need to carry on. I think Tony Benn's main thing was to raise the voice of voiceless people, the vulnerable people, wherever they live, whether they live in Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, or in Palestine or Kashmir. He always raised the voices of it. Second thing, he always fought against war. He said the best way to deal with things is dialogue, strengthen the United Nations. He was very great supporter of non-aligned movement, which is non-existent today, but unfortunately the leader of that non-aligned movement have gone. I hope with Aaron Simpson and Jeremy Corbyn, other people who are still committed to non-aligned movement, we will have something to do with it. I think he always worked for peace and justice. He was always against war. He said, if we have money to kill people, we must have money to feed the people in the world and make them healthy people. And I think that is the greatest thing in Tony Benn's legacy. We should continue. I think the pictures you are seeing on this screen are in a meeting which Raja Faiz Sultan organized. He is reporting today for Junk and Geo, but he organized under the World Labour Organization. And I give you one small story and then I will invite Ellen. He went with me to that meeting. And let me give you another example of Tony Benn. One, I was approached by South Asian movement in Bradford. And they said, Tony, we are contacting him, but he is not available. And Tony always used to travel by train. He will never go by car. He said, I'm busy, Mushtaq. I can't go because I've got a meeting at 10 o'clock. He will wake up at 6 o'clock. He will sleep at 2 o'clock, wake up at 6 o'clock, and I know because I was living about 200 yards from him, and I used to visit him. He will call me at 8 o'clock. Can you wake up at 8 o'clock? I said, I'll come, and he will sit there with a cup of tea, which without milk. So he will drink the tea without any milk. He was vegetarian as well. So I said, we have to go to Bradford. He said, okay, I'm going to meet at 10 o'clock, so if you come at 12 o'clock, we will go to Bradford, and can you bring me back by midnight? I said, definitely. So I asked my son to drive us to Bradford. He's a young man, so we drove him there, and on the way we had a lot of meetings. Everybody wanted to meet him, whether it is in Nottingham, whether it is in Leeds, wherever. When I told a lot of Pakistanis that there are few Pakistanis, Steve Collins, your seat is here. Steve Benn is here. So do you mind, Steve, to come and join Aaron Simpson? Yes. There is a seat for you. So we traveled from here to Bradford, and then he spoke there, and we came back. It was the best 12 hours I spent with a great man. Steve Benn is the oldest son of Tony Benn, who has joined us. Steve, welcome. So I think on the way back, my son drove a little faster, and he was sitting at the back seat. I was sitting with him, and another man was sitting with us. He drove fast. But when we came in front of 12 Holland Park Avenue, where he lived for many, many years, he came out and he shook hands with everybody and looked at my son and he said, was it F1 driver I'm traveling with him? So he simply criticized him for driving fast, but in a very diplomatic language. And the second thing which he has mentioned about World Labour Organization, let me tell you, he went to that meeting with me. And all the speakers were speaking in Urdu. And he wrote it in his diaries 2001 to 2007. If you pick up the book, you will see Third World Solidarity and myself mentioned many times. And he wrote half page of it. He said, I was sitting in a meeting where the language I couldn't understand, but I was looking at Mushtaq and clapping when he was clapping, laughing when he was laughing, and this was the meeting which you are looking at it. And then he said, then I was so lucky that somebody came who spoke in English. And he put his poem, whole poem in that page, and that is You and Me by Mahmood Jamal Mia's son, in which he compared a terrorist and a general human being like you and me. It is on page 78 in his last diaries, 2001 to 2007, which was mentioned by Katie Clark and others, even Rob, that he left the parliament saying that I want to do more politics. And he did more politics after 50 years as a parliamentarian, from 1951 to 2001, and he retired by his last speech was, I want to do more politics. And he did more politics from 2001 to 2014, because I remember we used to attend at least 200 meetings, public speaking, every year since then. And I used to meet him every year, because I'm going to that a miners' gala for the last 10 years as well. And he was going there for the last 67 years, he told me 2 years ago. And I think remembering Tony Benn is the only way to carry on with the commitment and the vision he has left for us, and that is the best way to remember him. Thank you very much. Steve Benn has joined us, who is the oldest son of Tony Benn, and his daughter Emily Benn is fighting in private South. We hope she will be another parliamentarian. Last year your younger brother Hilary Benn spoke, and I hope you will say a few words at some stage. But can I invite the godson of Tony Benn, Alan Simpson, former MP from Britain, Alan Simpson.
I'm not sure about godson, but Tony was my mentor, my minder, my best mate, my best man throughout the entirety of my political life. And I just want to reflect on what that meant and where I think that he would be urging us to look if he were sitting here today. I have to say that barely a day goes by when I don't feel I have some sort of conversation with him and where I don't miss him. Tony was the best leader that the Labour Party never had, and we never had him, not because of anything about him, but because of the friends who left him. That I have very little time for those who said, oh, he was sabotage by the Gang of Four, and then they left. Actually, it was the left that left us bereft of his leadership of the party. But none of that slowed him down or deflected him at all. And it was that indefatigable optimism that I think that is, if we could bottle it and pass it round, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in now. Even on the last day of his life, he was propped up in bed, wearing a t-shirt that said, saying no to the poll tax, 1381. And it seemed to symbolise so much about him. Here was someone who managed to be, or give you the feeling that he was at an event over 500 years before he was born, and was still part of the same struggle. And that was one of his overarching gifts. He could do this grand tour of the last 1,000 years, describing events in which he felt he was probably present, and bringing them together into a coherent theme that brought you to where we are now and what we needed to do next. And this was a communications gift that very few politicians have. Most of us have an incredible ability to bore people to death and dissipate excitement. Tony had an ability to harness it, bottle it and pass it on. And he always did so by moving the goalposts. The first meeting that I can recall doing with him was at Nottingham University, and it was a year or so after the government had raised the school leaving age to 16, and there were various points that came out of the university meeting, and someone challenged him and asked him what he thought about the raising of the school leaving age, and he said, well, I'm in favour of raising it not to 16 but to 60, because I think education should be a right to everyone throughout life. And he got barracked by this woman who suddenly stood up in a huge rage, and she said, listen, Mr. Benn, I am 70 and I've just got my degree, why should I be excluded? She said, right, I moved the goalposts right away. And that was his ability to move those goalposts. The other meeting that he did on education, which was no less devastating, was in his own constituency in Chesterfield, where there was a school meeting, and he was on the platform and listening to the parents talking about the crisis of funding that they had and how they might address it, and whether they should put up advertising hoardings on the front of the school on the main road, or whether they should change what they sold in the tuck shop, whether they should have t-shirts with sponsorship from local companies. And Tony sat there and listened, and eventually the head turned to him and said, well, what do you think, Mr. Benn? You listen to all these ideas, what do you think? And Tony said, well, have you thought about prostitution? And there was a silence in the hall. And you see, because I understand that prostitution pays better than the price of a Mars bar, and crack cocaine is apparently even better still. You could be selling that in the tuck shop. And the looks of horror spread from the audience through to the head teacher. I was thinking, where on earth is going? Then Tony said, you know, call me old-fashioned for that. See, I don't think we should be selling our children. Education should be a birthright, and it should be funded out of taxation. And a nation that is as rich as we are should be giving that education and funding it through taxation, and not sending parents scurrying around trying to raise bits of money to make the education ends meet. And people just cheered because he gave them the blindingly obvious that we should not, in a rich country, be setting the poor against each other in pursuit of the fragments of funding at the edges of that society. And my guess is he'd be saying exactly the same to us now. We're not far away from these exchanges that have been taking place, engineered by the military or whatever, calling for a 2% commitment of GDP to the defence budget. That's what will prop up NATO, that's what the US say we should be making commitment to. But Tony would, I think, have turned that around and said that, you know, the state of the insecurity in the world that we have is actually driven by defence funding. This carnage across the Middle East was driven by the Blair-Bush Mujahideen and has turned the whole area and large parts of Africa as well into today's killing fields. And instead of a case for 2% of GDP going on defence, you really should be arguing 2% of GDP going into aid. Because for all the UKIP arguments about the burden of immigration in the UK, the global reality is that the vast majority, millions of those displaced persons around the planet are not being offered succour by the UK. They're being offered succour by their neighbours. We live in a world where, in the main, the poor are being looked after by the destitute. And that we need to, if we want to tackle that, it is food and aid and education and security that will bring about stability and a degree of our own collective ability to live on a very fragile, increasingly fragile planet. Now, some of the things that Tony would do as a friend in here, he would often come in and carry a little polythene bag. It didn't matter which shop it was from, but it was clearly he was struggling, and he'd often call me and he'd say, "Have you got a few moments?" And I'd say, "Yeah, sure, of course I have. Whatever, what do you want? What do we need to talk about?" I said, "You know, just have a little project." And we'd go off to some tucked away part of the Palace of Westminster. Tony would open this polythene bag and bring out a Black & Decker drill and a set of drills and screws. And I'd, "What on earth is going on here?" And he'd say, "I've got a plaque here that we need to put on because," and it didn't matter what it was, the Chartists, the suffragettes, any of the international struggles that had come from a popular base. And he said, "This place, it recognises the great and the good, but not those who've done the greatest good. And I'm getting a bit too weak in the arm, so if I hold the plaque, could you do the drilling?" So we'd be tucked away, and I'd be thinking at some point the police and the security guard are going to come in as we drill these holes in the wall, and then hurriedly put up a plaque. And then 3 or 4 days later there'd be a note from the sergeant at arms office saying, "Mr. Benn, could you come and just talk about something that's appeared in a wall in the closet here? Could we talk about it?" And Tony would go there and I'd say, "What are we doing?" He'd say, just hear them out. And he'd listen and be told that this was not allowed under the parliamentary rules, and he just had to ask, and Tony said, I understand that. But you know, what they do is terribly important, and we don't recognise it adequately enough in the parliament. And so he would offer an assurance. Next time, he would always come and ask first, and I'd come out and say, is that what we're doing? He said, no, you never ask first. Always make a point of doing things, and then ask permission afterwards. That's the way to bring about change. And that's what he was brilliant at. He had this ability to come in and not just, most of us here would own up to loving the man, but actually the real achievement was that he was the only politician apart from Mandela that I've ever met who had the ability to get us to love ourselves. That to see within our reach an ability to transform the world. And the story, when we would do around the story that he, I think, told most often in my company, was about a village where a child falls down the well, and the villagers all come to try and get the child out, and there's a voice that comes from the bottom of the well from the child saying, I'm all right, but lower a rope. So the villagers went and they got ropes and they lowered them down. One came to about 25 foot short, one 24, 15 foot, 10 foot, one tantalisingly 4 or 5 foot beyond the child's reach. And the voice from the child from the bottom of the well shouted back up, tie your ropes together. And that was Tony's message to us. If we just have the sense to tie our ropes together, actually we have the ability not only to rescue ourselves, but to transform society in ways that many of us could only dream of. But Tony actually lived the dream, was the embodiment of that dream. And that's what I think we need to do. And I think you're right, Mr. to say this isn't about commemoration. The question for all of us is, what are we going to do about the legacy of Tony Benn? I think that we needed a fellowship of someone that actually was driven with a remit on annual fellowships that could be passed on, driving forward ideas. Then when I thought about it, actually one fellowship is not enough. We probably need 5 at any point in time to cover the reach of ideas that Tony ran with. And that's, I think, what he wants us to do now, to carry on running with those ideas, turning them into realities. Because if we do, I think that that would be the biggest tribute that we could pay to him. An ability to actually take his ideas and turn them into tangible realities. Believing in ourselves and the fact that we really could change the world. And as I said in the Morning Star article I did on Saturday, actually it's not too late to prove them right. We just have to have the courage to do it. And to put all the resources that we have into moving that into a shape that has an ongoing transformational legacy and not just a nostalgic one.
Thank you very much, Alan. And I think it is very important that we carry on with the task which Tony Benn did all his life. Before I invite Stephen, we always welcome the people at the end to comment or ask questions from the speakers. But I want to welcome everybody from Third World Solidarity. Dr. Victoria Goddard is sitting at the end, Sandra Santley, Kefale is sitting here. And can I ask everybody who is around here to give their emails to Kefale, who is standing at the end, that we can keep in touch with you in future events. And next, I think Wednesday, we have a very important meeting in room 10, which we will be discussing human rights in Ethiopia. And you are most welcome to join us at 6 o'clock in room 10. But Kefale, you take the details from everybody. Now I want to invite a very different sort of person. We have heard from people who have met Tony many times, but maybe he has met once or twice. He was High Commissioner, I think longest serving High Commissioner in Britain, and he worked with many parliamentarians in UK, particularly from Labour Party, when he got passed a resolution in Brighton Conference, and I hope you both were there to support him on Kashmir by the Labour Party. Robin Cook was the, no, it was Jared Kaufman who was the Shadow Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs under Neil Kinnock. And he got, no, it was Tony Blair by then, I think.
Tony Blair was it.
Yeah, and he got it passed, and he worked very closely with the Labour Party, including Tony Blair. Can I ask His Excellency, Wajid Shamsul Hasan to speak briefly? Thank
you. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a pleasure for me to be here with you this evening to remember great Tony Benn. As a matter of fact, when I was appointed High Commissioner by Benazir Bhutto, who was the first second-time Prime Minister of Pakistan, and usually, you know, those normal briefing that ambassadors get, I went to her, and she gave me some names. And on top of those names was Tony Benn's name. He said, you must meet him, since you are inclined towards socialism. He's the best person to teach you socialism. Well, that is what I did when I came here. One of my first meetings was with Tony Benn, and lasted long. We had lunch together. And he was such a fatherly figure and such an inspiring person that I have not found anybody second to him, anybody as good as him, or anybody who was as knowledgeable as him. Although I had the pleasure of knowing Robin Cook was also an excellent person, and I would say one of the finest foreign ministers, foreign secretaries that the UK had in the recent past. Then others also, you know, Tariq, he was also our minister. He was also very good. But Tony Benn was the person who was always there to guide us. You know, I was an outsider. I was not from foreign service like this young man here is. I was a journalist all my life. And as a journalist, I think Tony Benn took interest in me as well, because he has been a journalist himself, he has been writing, and I've been very fond of listening to him while driving. I used to drive to various places, up country, here and there, because I have a very huge diaspora. And I used to have his cassettes in my car and listen to them, and they used to be so entertaining and enthralling and educative. Well, people like him are not on every day, probably in centuries. At the best tribute, I think, Rasheed, you have done a great job, did wonderful having it in this function. We should always have it, and we should have rather, you know, not just making a few speeches here and there. We should always talk about what he did, and, you know, we must speak some sort of in depth about the man, because that's how we have to remember him. Because that is how we are going to move forward. Because when I see the composition of Labour Party, including Pakistan, because our party, PVP, that was in government at that time, is supposed to be a sister party to the Labour Party and member of Socialist International. So we were all together. But I hardly see socialism anywhere. All the political leaders, all the political members of various parties, maybe they have different colors of feathers, they fly in the same direction. Unfortunately, I must say this. And, but if we were to follow Tony Benn, we will have a sense of direction, we will have a commitment that we have to make this world equitable to everybody. We have to have equal distribution, equitable distribution of wealth, human rights, rights of poor, rights of various less privileged communities. That is what Tony Benn stood for, and that is what he lived for. And that is where the credit lies, that the man lived and died for the cause that he has always been dear to him. With these words, I thank you once again for having invited me here to Tariq and giving me a chance to speak about a great man who we all remember always. Thank you.
But can I now invite Steve? I met you last time at flat 11, 12 bedroom terrace, is it right? Where he was living for his last days. And Steve was running around to find out. Tony was one of those people who wanted to be independent up to the last days. And he went to cash machine, and I think he lost his card into machine because he went to the hospital first. He was in hospital, and he was a great supporter of NHS all the times. And Steve was trying to sort out, and he was not feeling very happy that somebody else has to sort out something. So can I say that he lived very independent life. He will walk around, he will travel by public transport in Rochdale. Once I asked him, because his second son, Hilary Benn, who is now Shadow Secretary of State for Defence, had moved in 2005, Sandra, if I'm right, to say in the other side of the room, approved under Third World Solidarity, our party parliamentary group, that we, the Britain, is one of the richest nations and we must do 0.7% of our GDP for aid, which Ellen and a lot of people have mentioned that we should do more. And he did it during his period because we were at that time 0.2%. And he rapid or fast-tracked it and we should do it under the Labour Party. But we couldn't by 2010. I think it was achieved by 2013. And we have to stress, because I think now the government is thinking to reduce it or discuss it at least. I think it is great to have people who live in a more developed world, but always think about the people who are living in a very poor, difficult circumstances. Can I invite Stephen Benn to speak for whatever experience? Obviously, you have lived for a very long time as a son, but very long time. Steve Benn.
Thank you very much. And the first thing I do want to say on behalf of the family, of whom I am a representative here tonight, is to say thank you for having put this meeting on and to do it in his honour. It's very kind of you. I'm afraid I don't speak Urdu, so those of you who do and don't speak English won't understand a word of what I'm about to say. But I'm very grateful and I'm glad to be able to be here. And it's very nice to hear what is said about him. I missed what Alf had to say, but it's very nice indeed to hear what the others have said so far. I won't, if it's all right with you, attempt to impersonate him. You'll have to battle it out with the speaker, who is well known for doing a very good line in impersonation. But I must admit, when I look at the photographs that are on the screens, it's lovely for me to see him. You can tell that it was taken at least 6 months before he died, because he sort of gave up shaving in August. And so the last few months of his life, he had a beard. He did once have a beard in 1969 when he was a minister, and he shaved it off in the middle of a ministerial visit to what was then Yugoslavia, and it caused a lot of consternation. They were all expecting a bearded minister to get off the plane, and he didn't. It was a clean shaven. And I was just sitting here thinking about what, if anything, I could say that might be useful today. And of course, he was the youngest member when he went through the door just over there in 1950. And yet, by the time he arrived here, albeit as a very young member, he had had some real experience. And I mention it because I think it did radicalise him when he was young. He learned to fly in what was then called Rhodesia in the 1940s. His older brother, my uncle, was a fighter pilot. And he learned to fly, and he had his first taste of what was life in, Southern Africa at the time, and the way people were treated, and I think you can read about that in his diaries too. And I think that was his first hint of radicalisation, as well as the election campaign in 1945. And in the 1950s, he was a very strong supporter of the movement for colonial freedom. And when I was very young, we got to know the names of some of the people who were regarded, if I may say so, as by many people here as terrorists, because they were and soon emerged as the leaders of their own independent countries. I'm thinking, for example, of Sretsikama, you may know, who lived in London and to Brixton, and who was a frequent visitor to our house, and we got to know him very well, and he became the godfather of my sister. So there was a very close connection, and he was a strong supporter as a sort of radical. He wasn't the person that you got to know later in his political life, but he did, like everybody, go on a journey. And in the 1950s, that was his journey. In the 1960s, he had his own experience that personally radicalised him, trying to remain as a member of Parliament. And then later, we're in the Wilson Room at the moment, named after the Prime Minister Harold Wilson, who appointed him to the government in the 60s and 70s, and he learned a great deal, and always said he learned a great deal from experience, including his experience as a minister. And I think it's also true that it's sort of appropriate that his very last appearance in Parliament which was over there in Westminster Hall in December 2013, his very last speech, as well as his last appearance in the palace, was at the meeting to commemorate Nelson Mandela. And we had gone as children with him and the family on anti-apartheid demonstrations in the 60s, and there he was speaking with others. But I must admit, if you look at it, because it's all on YouTube, his speech was very short, and he simply said that what you always remember Nelson Mandela for was for the anger against injustice and the hope of a better world if you fight for it and tie your ropes together. And the other thing I would leave you with is something that I'm sure you all know very well. And he took every opportunity to say it, especially to younger people, when he was speaking, which he did do a great deal of. He did leave the House to spend more time on politics, and that's exactly what he did. And he mentioned the school leaving age. The Open University presented him with a posthumous doctorate in September, which is very nice, and I went along to receive it on his behalf, and I made a point of saying that he was in favour of a school leaving age not only up to 65, but 95. And blow me down, I didn't discover that the oldest graduate of the Open University is older than me. So he would have liked that very much. But no, the thing I will leave you with are the 5 questions he used to put. I'm sure you know them, but they're well worth repeating. And these are questions you should put to people who have power, wherever and whenever you meet them. First of all, what power have you got? Secondly, where did you get it from? Thirdly, in whose interests do you exercise it? Fourthly, to whom are you accountable? And fifth, how do we get it? And I mention that in particular because they're very easy questions. We are, after all, coming up to the general election. And if there's one merit in the general election, without being too politically partisan, you can get rid of people who like without killing them, and I leave that to the electorate. But thank you very much for organising this meeting and for remembering him. And I hope that he will be remembered for many years to come. And it will be a pleasure on every occasion to listen to the impersonations of him. But thank you very much. And on behalf of myself and all my family, I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Can I ask if Al Farah is here from Palestinian delegation? No? Okay, folks, we're going to open now for short questions and answers, comments. Anybody wants to make any input?
Question answer.
Sandra, just give me in.
No, I don't really have a question.
Just one give you one.
My name is Sandra Satterley. I'm a journalist, but I'm also a founding member of People with Solidarity. Over the years, Tony Benn was, still is in spirit, instrumental in informing what People with Solidarity does. Tony Benn was a mentor of Mushtaq Bashari when Mushtaq Bashari first came to this country, as been aforementioned. We've had so many meetings over the years with Tony Benn. At his house, I've interviewed him as a journalist. He's inspired, as everyone has indicated tonight, all people that listen. And I think the voice is still there. I thank Tony Benn's son, who's here tonight, that I've not had the opportunity, whom I've not had the opportunity to meet before. But I thank everyone who's spoken, because from the Durham Miners meetings that I've been to myself, along with Professor Victoria Goddard, where Tony Benn has always been there, to so many demonstrations that I have gone to the front and walked along with Tony, to his legacy today in this meeting. I'd just like to thank everyone who's here, who supports him, and the voice that I think will remain with us and should do to inspire our future forever. Thank you.
Doctor.
One of my blessings in life is to meet Tony Blair, because I used to send emails to him, and he was very kind to me indeed, And I thought, what can I call him? I said in my subject line of email, Saint Benn, remember, again. That was my subject line of email to him. And I am not the only one calling him saint, because as you may know, many people call him Prophet Benn. So I was not unusual, but I did call him Saint Benn. And secondly, I became victim of a supplement promotion, and I was bypassed by somebody who was less qualified for promotion. And Tony Benn, lovely man he was, he wrote a letter to the Vice Chancellor. And I can tell you this one thing, the man had humanity and compassion in him, and he said that this blind person, Dr. Marshall, we all respect him, why don't you please don't treat him unfairly and promote him. And his letter of support was quoted to other people, and 13 people wrote in my support, and the job is done. Now I have an office in the university until I retire, and that was the settlement brought about by Tony Benn. And last time I met him was on 20 July 2010, and he said to me this. He said, Amir, I know you. You used to walk around on your own, fast and actually well. And what's the problem? You have problem of mobility now. And he said, and that is the measure of the man. He said, I don't like that. Please take care of yourself. And that was the last meeting with that senior man. And thank you very much for listening to me.
Tell us who you are, please.
Thank you very much. I would just like to remind people and to acknowledge now to the family and to everyone gathered here Tony's tremendous contribution to everything. But what I want to specifically mention is the number of times you turned up on a cold January day at the Bloody Sunday parades and protests, endeavouring to help us to get the inquiry which we ultimately got, which went on for the best part of around 40 years. It was absolutely appreciated. It meant an awful lot to us that someone of his status, of his stature, of his integrity should lend his support to us over the decades. And it meant an awful lot. And I want to say a profound thank you from myself and all the other Irish people involved.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Myself, Tariq Rasheed, the Labour Party fundraising officer for Brent Central CLP, London Borough of Brent. Thank you very much, Mushtaq Saab, to invite me to attend the first Tony Benn anniversary. I feel honoured to say a few words about the Labour Party great parliamentarian Tony Benn. As my very little knowledge, and all of you know that as well, Tony Benn was born in London on 3rd April 1925. Since first time he won by-election on 30 November 1950 to till his death, the age of 88. Tony Benn served the Labour Party principally and passionately. We will never forget the Tony Benn in our British politics. I have my best heart condolence for Tony Benn. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Myself, Laqat Ali Hazara from Hazara United Movement, a small campaigning group in the UK, trying to persuade all factions for stopping persecution of Hazaras in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Well, one thing I have noticed coming up, obviously, in this conference, and that is the protector and promoter of human rights. Mr. Tony Benn actually
the kudos should go to Mr. Mushtaq Lashari and his team, the ATPG, for organizing such a conference. The only thing I can see in this, obviously, part of the world is the people of all colors, all faith, all creed, and all cultural background can get together to pay tribute or tremendous tribute to somebody who has at least done something for the protection of human rights. On the contrary, we can see the people in some other parts of the world which are more volatile, that the human rights activists actually, if you can try or dare holding such a conference in their favor or to pay any tribute to them, at least this is not possible. For different reasons, the non-state actors actually could also target them, as well as the intelligence agencies and the establishment in those worlds. So I should say that me, like other fellows here, are very fortunate to pay tribute to somebody like Mr. Tony Benn, and I do hope that the promotion and protection of human rights and human values will promote and go ahead or cherish in conferences like this one. Thank you very much.
Joe, you sure that's chance to jump in here?
First of all, we are gathered here to pay tribute to Tony Benn, but I will have one question. Before I ask you this question, I have to tell you a little bit of my own experience that 5.5 years ago, when I came here, I was a student of politics and I joined law, and I used to meet Quinton Hogg, and the government was of conservative, and for a few years, then I started listening to Tony Benn's, his speeches, and slowly and slowly, I joined the Labour Party, and then after that, I went fully listening to the Labour Party leaders. Tony Benn stood out as leader, and he changed my life, and he changed my thinking altogether. With that act, in Pakistan, Rasheed Bhutto came on the scene. He became an international figure. Tony Benn stands at which stage in the international level? That is, I always think of that. Where I would like to ask you this question. Where does he stand in the international figures?
No one's answer. No, I'm asking him. I'm very, very clear. He stands right at the highest level because he believed in nationalism, and he believed in nationalism not for his own personal or political well-being. He believed it as it was part of his soul. He believed in it as a humanitarian and as a member of the human race, and he lived his life that way. And he didn't do it for political, military or other reasons. He did it because he passionately believed in the rights of humankind and the needs of humankind, and we do a lot more people like him. Anyone else wants to? Gentleman at the back.
Just like to add to the 5 democratic questions that Tony mentioned, that you can't...
Speak up, please.
Sorry, if you... first of all, what power have you got? Where did you get it from? And to whom are you accountable? And how can we get rid of you? And he also said that if you can't get rid of powerful people, we don't live in a democracy. It's that simple. Now, I used to go to several of his meetings, and he said, "Oh, you're coming here again?" I said, "Yes, I know. I come to see you." He said, "You know, I often see you here, and if I come to a meeting and you're not here, I think I've gone to the wrong meeting. I really do." So one of my recollections of many of the time when I met him again at Toll Puddle. I had my partner with me then, and I introduced him to him. And he said, you know, he follows me everywhere. I don't know where he gets the energy from. I said, well, actually, I go on quick equipment dual cell batteries. This will be attached to it. Well, thank you very much for
I think there are two kinds of leaders. One, they do the work, and one, they get the applause. So Tony Benn was the one who was actually feeling for the world, and he was doing the work for the solidarity. But Tony Blair was politically successful, and he ruled Britain and the world. So in my opinion, Tony Benn is better than Tony Blair. Thank you.
I've just got a question for the panel. In light of the fact that Tony Benn left Parliament to do more politics, as people have said, is there any saving of the Labour Party? There's lots of people now, particularly young people, moving to the Green Party. I myself, after Iraq and Afghanistan, still could not vote for the Labour Party until those people are in a war crimes tribunal in The Hague. Is there any saving of the Labour Party, or do we move elsewhere?
Personal panels up for election are probably the wrong one to ask for. I'll ask these gentlemen either side of the response.
I also left Parliament to spend more time on politics, but I refused to leave the Labour Party. And Tony and I used to have lots of conversations about precisely this, and Tony said, look, you know, if you strip it to its worst, lowest level, the reality is this: it always upsets them more if you stay than if you go. And that's true. The history of the Labour Party and the Labour movement in this country is often littered with its own tragedies. One of the other things Tony says is that almost the problems for Labour is the theological obsession that if two or more are gathered together in my name, it's obviously time for a split. And it's our disunity, our willingness to detach ourselves from each other, that is our enduring source of weakness. So, I was the national chair of Labour Against the War for about a decade, and for all the horrendous things that the Labour government did, and the way in which Labour MPs were manipulated and deceived by a leader who was really a war criminal, and was brought to trial and such, that is not a case for leaving the Labour Party. It's a case for getting shut at those who lead us into war, not walking away. And the reality of British politics is that I would love it if the Greens could transform the Labour Party. They're not going to be decisive players in the formation of the next government. And so I would always say that Labour was at its strongest and most radical when radical movements came into the Labour Party rather than left it. And that they themselves, each of those movements, worked out how to form alliances within the party to change the direction of the party. And that's still my profound belief, and the reason why I refuse to leave. But that doesn't make the Labour Party a desirable entity. It is pitifully unambitious in where we are now. Pitifully. Does it measure up to the challenges that face us in the next decade that will determine the whole shape of the planet? No, it does not. But if we're going to construct or reconstruct a party that is fit to make those challenges, you've got to be in the ring peeing out rather than outside trying to pee in.
My background's trade unions. I would argue that a lot of my comrades in the trade union movement have done exactly what you did because of some of the things that happened in the last 20 years. And all we've done is make us weaker and let other people who are destroying this country take control. If there'd been a strong left united party that people would get behind, perhaps that would have been great, but sure there isn't. And as long as we keep walking away, or some people keep walking away, it just means more chance other people be in there. And I say to people all the time, it's the oldest story in the book. You've got to organise it, and if you're not part of it, you can't organise it. And so if we get people who are MPs, councillors, etc., people in the Labour Party whose views aren't like most people in this room, but we're not in there trying to take them out, then unfortunately they'll keep on coming in. Olivia?
Yes, thanks. I just wanted to respond to the sister over there. Actually, I knew Tony from about 1978, so I want to say I was quite young then, but I'm not sure. And he was very good at encouraging ordinary people to do actually extraordinary things. And what he was brilliant at in Bristol was creating what I would call a rainbow coalition. So in Bristol, it was everything from ensuring that people who worked on the buses were allowed to work on the buses even though they were African Caribbean. That was his history that we inherited. But also things like troops out of Northern Ireland, when Sinn Féin and other people were not allowed on Ender television. And in Bristol, a very strong movement which supported many of the colleagues and comrades down here. But one thing he was absolutely unwavering on, in my experience, and clearly he was defeated as an MP in Bristol, but you never lost your friendship with him. He was absolutely unequivocal about the idea that you actually stayed in the Labour Party because it was, frankly, in his words often, it was the game in town, not as an apologist for it, but I think he'd be very clear what we should be doing today. And you'd be with the colleague from Brent and you'd be saying, look, whatever its versions, we should be working for a Labour victory because that's the only one that's likely to change anything from where we are at the moment. And that was his inspiration as well.
Well, I was just going to say to the woman over there that if he was in the room now, he'd talk to him afterwards. I think he would do his very best to try to persuade you to leave. I think he would try to persuade you against leaving in the first place. I think he would make many of the arguments that you just heard the three people here use. I think he might say to you, which he said on many occasions, when talking about socialism in the Labour Party, he said, don't forget that the Labour Party does have some socialists in it. Rather like the church has some Christians in it. And you must never forget that in that sense, the broad church of the Labour Party consists of a lot of people. And I think he would like to feel that he might persuade you either to rejoin or not to the left on the 7th of May to vote for the Labour Party, because that's the best chance we have of removing the current government. And I think he would be doing his very best to do that. He might even be supporting his own granddaughter, who's a candidate. And if she wins, there'll be a Labour majority of about 200.
Gentlemen,
my name is Awa Marzukali. I live in England, Great Britain, nearly 50 years. And short memory, but I remember I am the luckiest one to drive Tony Benn from some conference 40 years ago. And I drive, and he was sitting on the first seat on the front. And when I was driving to take him home, if you all remember somebody, maybe Mushtaq Lashari remember, Abdul Amir Ghazi. He was told me to, you going home, take Tony Blair with you, you know. And I was very lucky man, the way to choose me to take him and drop him at home. When I opened the car, front seat he was sitting, short memory, and he said to me, which part of world you came in England? And I said to him, I came in Great Britain about 5 years ago. And I said, I'm originally from Mongolia, my back history, I said, from Mongolia. And you said from Mongolia, I said, yes. He said, you doesn't look like real Mongolia. I said, no. He was a very great man. And I said, no, I'm the race of Genghis Khan. Originally we live in Afghanistan and Iran and Russia, so we living on Balochistan and Quetta, Balochistan. He said, Quetta, I know, is a headquarter was for the British Army on ruling time, Quetta, Balochistan. They call it Staff College. If remember, he was so fast, you know. And I said, yes, Staff College is still in Quetta. And he was very happy. He said, like you said, you came in Great Britain. He said, we are great. First time I see some Mongolian from Chang's race, you know, in England, he said. He said he was very happy. He was very happy for that. And he said, I'm very glad, you know, to Great Britain bring every kind of community in England. And he said, I'm very happy to see the first Mongol from Genghis Khan race. And he was very happy. And this shall remember it. Thank
you. My comrade in the wider meeting.
Can I thank David Nelson, who has been a great chairman of Third World Solidarity since he took over as MP in 2005. I hope he will continue after the 7th of May, because we are expecting him to be re-elected from Bladen constituency. And Bladen was a constituency where everybody started the Labour Party, if I remember right. Yes. Can I thank all the media people, Asif Dar Saab, I think Rasheed is there, Dunia TV, and there are many other people who are here from media, Raja Saab, Raja Fuzan, and everybody else who has attended this meeting. I'm really thankful. But can I say that with the help of Wajid Shamsul, who has met him as a High Commissioner, we will do another meeting next year and much better. I want to start, which I announced last year as well, a lecture on Tony Benn. I hope Steve and Evelyn and family will support us. We want to do a lecture, because I think the best way to remember someone is to invite a person who can give a lecture on them. I know that a lot of people have read and met Tony many times, and they will continue as long as they live. But I think remembering somebody and shifting it to the next generation is always, if you start a lecture on the present issues, and we will do it next year on 14th of March. And Aaron, thank you for writing a big article in Morning Star day before yesterday, which actually I think some people read and they are in attendance here. I thank everybody, Leslie and these young two ladies are organizing a meeting of Kurdish, Kurdish on day after tomorrow in Aki Suite, and anybody who want to join us, let's meet them. I think you are French speaking, so it's good to have people from France, Ethiopia, from I don't know which part of the world. So thank you, and particularly thank to Mustafa Rabbani, who is representing Pakistan High Commission. Thank you everybody, and good luck and have a safe journey, and see you soon. Thank you.